Welcome back, everybody. Today we're going to be talking about Gen Z and their very awkward dating and sex life. Now, we're not talking about Gen Z kids here. We're talking about adult Gen Z, such as myself. I'm 26 and I'm still Gen Z. Goes to show there is a pretty substantial part of Gen Z these days that are adults. And you'd expect, especially as they get into their later 20s, that they would be, at least at some point, getting into the dating scene and, having sex, getting married, thinking about the future relationship-wise. But the reality is, on a provable statistic level, that is not what's happening. Gen Z is running away from sex in a full sprint. They're running away from dating and relationships at a full sprint. And more so than women, it is men that are voluntarily opting out of this dating thing among Gen Z. This is a conversation not many on the left want to have, but it's one that needs to be had, because this social isolation, this self-enforced social isolation, does breed incel mindset. It separates men and women even more and creates this tribalism that can only breed toxicity. And so, I think it's important that we analyze this and look into the reasons why Gen Z are not dating or having sex anymore. The reasons why will probably surprise you. You think Gen Z are kind of brain rotted and maybe ideologically motivated, but I think you'll be surprised by their reasons. I got a really good video here that I was recommended by a channel called Shokin Says. The video will be down below in the description for people who want to go send some support to the original, which I highly recommend you do. But without any further ado, leave a like on this video, subscribe if you want to see more from me, comment who's Xandering they haul down below, and let's get right into it.
I made a video a few weeks ago talking about why Gen Z is afraid of sex. I called it the sex recession, and I gave my 3 reasons to back it up. But you guys dropped thousands of comments on that video with your personal reasons for not having sex. And today, we're going to talk about those reasons from the mouths of Gen Zers themselves. There were a few common themes that I noticed, so I put them into 5 categories that we were going to break down. Starting with one that was pretty surprising to me: STDs. One of you said, there is an STD pandemic going on right now according to the statistics. They won't say it, but the numbers are genuinely alarming. That alone is reason enough to abstain from it. Interesting. And a user named MightyTaco123 just said,
I'm not gonna lie, that is a real fear. I'd say Gen Z grew up with the best education. We grew up with the best education about sex that you could get in America. And so coming to adulthood, we're very familiar with how dangerous for your health sex can be if it's not practiced safely. The problem is, I don't think a lot of Gen Z are confident that they are going to be able to practice it safely, consistently enough that they're not effectively rolling a dice every time they hook up with someone. No one wants to end up with an STD or an STI or whatever.
Said, I don't want STDs. Valid. Now, this is an interesting one for me because it makes me reflect on how much of a reckless young lad I was in my 20s. I'm not going to say I wasn't paranoid about catching an STD, but it definitely wasn't stopping me. Because in my mind, just trust your partner and wrap it up, right? But there were hundreds of comments talking about how Gen Z has a genuine fear of catching an STD. And according to the statistics, there is real reason to be concerned. Research says that kids aged 15 to 24 accounted for almost half of the reported STI cases in 2023. 48.2% to be exact. That is a scary number that says that you are far more likely to catch an STD while you are young, which Gen Z is. And with me being a Zillennial, which is someone born right before Gen Z, I can attest to this from my own personal experience and the experiences of my friends. A lot of my friends that I knew in college who were sexually active had caught something in the past, or at least were worried that they had caught something at some point. I've also had to get tested several times in my life, and one of my best friends in college actually—
You always just should. Whenever you go to the doctor's office, you just gotta pee in a cup and you can get, a routine test. But yeah, nobody wants to end up getting themselves fucked over for life with an STD. I think a lot of Gen Z, it's hard to say whether or not they're overreacting or if they're being overly cautious on this, right? At the end of the day, I don't think that someone needs to have sex to be a well-adjusted person. Ever. Literally ever. Someone could be a virgin their whole life and be a well-adjusted person and probably be fulfilled and happy as well. I think most people would like to do it at some point, and I think most of Gen Z is probably thinking that if we lived in a perfect world, they would absolutely be doing that, but we don't, right? There's just a number of factors that make it risky. And Gen Z is, if nothing else, extremely risk-averse. Is there literally any generation more risk-averse than Gen Z? I don't think there's a single one. Like, if I were to imagine something that defines Gen Z, it would be anxiety and risk aversion. And conflict aversion.
Actually ended up catching HIV. So now he'll be on medication for the rest of his life because of one mistake. And there's also a conversation to be had about the education around STDs. I think back to one day where my college roommate came back from a one-night stand, and he said, and I quote, "I need to wash the STDs off before they settle in." Yeah, yikes. I don't know what this man was being taught in school, but that is not how that works at all.
That is not how
and
it
that
works.
is a night and day difference from this commenter who said, "I actually do not have any feelings of shame for being a virgin, mainly due to the fear of STDs." Unlike my college roommate, he clearly did not fear STDs because he thought he could just wash them off, which is crazy. So score 1 for Gen Z. I initially didn't think this was a big concern, but when I really thought about it, you should be cautious because an STD can be a life sentence. So definitely educate yourself and protect yourself better than my generation did. And if you're gonna do it, find a partner you trust. Which leads to our second reason to why Gen Zers say they don't have sex. They can't find someone to have sex with. So before I kick off this section, let's assume that we are talking about straight men and straight women only, okay? Let's see what this commenter had to say. The dating market became globalized. You aren't competing against males in your neighborhood anymore. You are competing against Saudi princes, Nepo babies, and Chad-adjacent men thousands of miles away. The Saudi prince thing is a bit dramatic, but he's right. Another commenter said, "It's also harder to look good when you don't have enough money for..."
I feel like we should have stayed on that last comment a bit longer, but I do think there's a conversation to be had about that. A lot of people on the left will disagree with me when I say this, but like, women in our society, in the world of dating, are more often than not the gatekeepers of relationships and sexual interactions. Let's be real, 99% of the time, guys are down to fuck. If they meet an attractive woman, they're down to fuck. And most women are seen as attractive by most guys, right? And so whether or not the woman is down to fuck is the decider, more often than not. And women are typically far more picky. Not always, but usually far more picky than guys are. Guys will more often than not take what they can get, while women effectively peruse through, like, you know, options. It's not like... Yeah, women like having options, and often do have options. The video audio, not Zan. Oh, is the video audio weird, or am I... Okay, I don't know. Anyway, like I was saying, because of this... It creates an environment where men feel as though they have to compete, like out in nature, like animals competing on a beach for mates. They have to compete against each other for the favor of women. And in a local setting, I feel like that's, you know, fairly healthy, right? Like, sure, whatever, you know, like the team, the high school football Giga Chad team leader or whatever gets the high school head cheerleader, right? And they end up getting married and they end up together or whatever. You know, who cares? But nowadays, like, let's say you live in like a rural small town and you're like a 16-year-old and you're like, you go to the local high school and there's maybe like a couple hundred other students at the high school, and all the girls at your high school are either dating someone else at the high school or dating someone over the internet. So there's nobody available. You know, it's like you're competing against technically the whole world of people their age, right? And so it's a global contest of like trying to make a good impression. And I definitely do see how a lot of guys, because I felt that when I was a teenager. I felt a little overwhelmed by that realization when I was a teenager, and God, that's got to have only gotten so much worse by now with how globalized the internet has gotten.
For gym memberships, brand new clothes, and dating apps. Online dating also messed up people's standards. If I'm being blunt, if you aren't rich, handsome, or overly charismatic, the chances of you being chosen by a woman are a lot lower. Although that doesn't mean it's impossible, I do think...
To be fair though, you don't want a relationship that's long-term with someone who considers a lack of those things a complete deal breaker. Like, realistically, if you are, like, ugly and broke, and you've got, like, issues that make you kind of shitty in some ways, and you find someone who is, like, accepting of that and loves you anyway, and then you improve in every way and see success, that's the kind of person you never have to be worried about leaving you and taking everything that you've gained. Like, because they were with you when you were at your lowest, and now you're at your highest, and they've got no reason to leave you, right? Like, you know that it's legit real love, right? Like, you don't want to be with someone who has those kind of petty requirements. And that's the realization that a lot of these men, I haven't seen any of them listing those reasons as why they're not dating. And I think many of them will hopefully come to that realization at some point once they do get into the dating scene.
Online dating and race standards have made it much harder for men to date and have sex. But what's the story for women? If it's so easy for them to go out and have sex, why are they also having less sex? Well, there are a few factors that women have to worry about that men don't. Like how when engaging in sexual activity, 99% of the time, women are committing to a power dynamic that puts them at risk. And that requires a lot of trust. In this theoretical and very generalized example, the woman has to factor in her safety when picking a partner. She has to make sure she isn't going to pick someone who is going to hurt her or get obsessed with her and stalk her or shame her online. Because although we are a much more progressive society, slut shaming is still a thing, especially in the professional world. And not to mention, there is a whole movement going around of women trying to decenter men from their lives, which means the days of a woman needing a man are over. So take that and combine it with
the way I like to word it isn't like, I don't need no man. It's that like we now don't, or we try now not to like scoff at a woman living her life like any guy does. And we're like, hell yeah, bro, stay on that hustle. Like a woman decides she wants to stay single in her 20s and focus on a career. That's like the end of the world. That's like a political statement. But a guy wanting to stay single and just grind through his 20s and focus on his career, that's just a given. That's what's expected. People congratulate you for that, you know? Like, I feel like most of what feminism is very much still just women trying to fight for the same standards that men have been held to.
The endless options online dating gives women, and it's easier for them to be picky. Your great-grandma didn't have that kind of freedom. It was either Philip who worked at the plant or Joe who was in the army, because that's who was around. And I alluded to this before, but with all these factors considered for men and women, it ultimately comes down to trust. Like this person says, the major thing is that trust is vital for sex. Since we live in a low-trust society, it has sharply declined, and men know that the game is rigged, so most are playing another game, sometimes literally. And he said dark tide is his go-to, which is funny because there's also research that suggests a link between gaming and a decreased sex life as well. But the point stands.
Hey, okay, let's
Gen
not
Z
talk
isn't
about
finding
that.
partners because they don't trust the opposite sex. And you can see that from the comments in my last video about this topic. A lot of people were just blaming each other. Like this woman said, some guys in this comment section really need to consider where all this bitterness is coming from. You can't generalize an entire population of humans as delusional, hard to get, and picky and expect them not to shut you down. Actual human connection to one another is important, and that is something I did not touch on enough in my last video. This disconnect between men and women has a lot of people just not wanting to play the game anymore at all. Alright, so we covered STDs and lack of partnership. The third reason Gen Zers say they don't have sex these days is because they can't afford it. This commenter said, I can't afford a freaking child, bro. Do you know how bad it is with costs right now? I won't
Like, honestly, this is going to be one of the big things Republicans have to tackle if they actually care about dropping birth rates. Like, it is unaffordable to raise a child, and many Americans, whether they believe in climate change or not, don't want to bring a child into a world where they can't promise their child and be telling the truth that everything's going to be okay. That they're going to have a house next month, that their child's going to have a bed to sleep in like tomorrow night, or they're going to have dinner next Friday, right? Like no potential parent wants to like bring a child into a world where they cannot assure their safety and happiness. You just won't have kids if that's the situation. And Gen Z is very much in that situation right now.
Subject another poor soul to this reality unless I can provide some kind of life to them. So no, my lady and I are abstinent for multiple reasons, but one is that it's way too risky for us and the potential child. I chose to highlight this comment specifically because this guy is actually in a relationship and still choosing to not have sex because, like this commenter says, an accidental child is a death sentence financially. This is something I think about a lot because me and my lady are doing okay. It's just the two of us and 2 cats, and she's a lawyer, I have my career. Money isn't tight, but we're by no means ballin'. So I compare that to someone who is in Gen Z who could barely get into the workforce right now, which means they are getting paid pennies, rent is still high, groceries are still high, just existing is expensive, and now all of a sudden you mess around and have a kid to feed? Yeah, good luck, buddy. And an accidental kid is an extreme in this scenario. This commenter said it best. He says he can't survive in this economy, let alone date. New clothes, gas money, drinks, dinner, condoms. Your wallet does not stand a chance in this economy.
Dating in the mind of Gen Z. Gen Z is really good at establishing a budget around the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you know? Like, you've got the things you absolutely have to have money for. Your bills, your groceries, all that good stuff, right? and then you've got like your tertiary circles, or like your potential like outside funds, and you know, you got your stuff that you always put into savings, you got your stuff you spend on things you've been wanting, you've got stuff you spend on like random impulse buys at the grocery store or whatever. Yeah, like depending on how tight your budget is though, you're not going to have money to do those like fun things such as dating. Dating is very low on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, dating and hooking up. Like when you're a struggling Gen Zer trying to get by in this awful economy, the last thing you need to be focused on is dropping like $150 on a nice suit or a nice outfit so you can go on a date, or going to expensive restaurants. You know, if you can afford it, then, you know, have at it, have a good time. But most of Gen Z cannot afford it right now. And a big part of this you can see is being represented a lot by Gen Z guys, because guys are expected to pay for dates. They're expected to carry a lot of the financial burden. And when that financial burden gets to be unbearable, like it is right now, you're going to see a lot of Gen Z guys just dropping off of the face of the earth when it comes to dating.
Especially considering a lot of us are still in debt from student loans. So yeah, you guys were spot on about this point. I saw a lot of comments about how it's just financially irresponsible to have kids right now. And it kind of ties into the next reason that you guys say you are not having sex, which is Gen Z is stuck in survival mode. Nobody has time for anything anymore. A lot of people mentioned this in the comments. This guy says he worked 99 hours last week alone, which is definitely something I can relate to.
Damn.
Young adults report stress, burnout, and mental health burdens more than any other generation. Because of this, a lot of people reported that they don't feel that they have the emotional bandwidth for intimacy. Because Gen Z is the generation that never experienced boredom. You have access to everything you could ever need on your phone, and when you aren't on your phone, you are likely in class, at work, or playing video games because you're burnt out from all of the above. That naturally leaves a lot less time for real human connection. If your life is in crisis, with your job, mental health, family, you're not going to prioritize dating. You're not going to make time to bang. And like we said before, risk.
A really interesting thing we found out during COVID that's similar to this, that reminds me of this, is related to pandas. You know how for decades and decades we've been trying to get captive pandas to mate and start like reproducing and recovering the population? But no matter what we tried, we could not get them to mate. But then COVID hit and all the zoos emptied, and the consistent, long-lasting privacy, like it wasn't about having like a few moments to themselves. It was about having weeks and weeks and months of minimal human contact all to themselves, and that's what made them start fucking like crazy. So now we know if we isolate the pandas from human contact, or get them into minimal human contact for a few months, they will start mating. We know that now. And what that means is that human contact really stresses out pandas and most zoo animals, to tell you the truth. And when animals are stressed out, they do not think about mating. Humans are not too dissimilar to those captive pandas, too stressed out and overwhelmed to think about mating, to think about dating, to think about masturbating. Oh my god, I'm a fucking rapper!
An STD and an accidental child. You're trying to use up what energy you have left just to survive. And although I'm not that far removed from Gen Z, this is still a night and day difference between Gen Z and Zillennials like myself. I don't know if my generation was just horny all the time, but when I was in my late teens and early 20s, it seemed like half our conversations were about sex. So we were going to make time to do it. But again, these were different times. The world is very different than it was just 10 years ago. I couldn't tell you the last time I genuinely had free time and I wasn't using it to stress about the other things that I know I should do. So I think the idea that Gen Z doesn't have time to have sex is a pretty valid point. Now, before we get into the final reason y'all gave for why you don't have sex, I have an honorable mention. A surprising number of you mentioned that you just think sex is gross. Whether that's because you don't believe in sex before marriage, you're asexual, or you just have no desire to do it. But my favorite reason by far is this one. This guy says, sex is temporary, Halo is infinite, which is hilarious.
Fair.
Alright, so back to the fifth and final reason, and I think this one really sums up how a lot of you guys felt in the comments. The state of the world. It's no secret that a lot of us are in uncomfortable situations right now. Take this comment for example. He says, We're not afraid of sex itself, we're afraid of the consequences: pregnancy, STDs, false accusations, and everything in between. People in this generation are dating and having sex, but a significant number are less willing to take risks. On top of that, as countless discussions have shown online, dating has become a nightmare in today's climate, complicated by social, cultural, and economic pressures. Many of us feel stuck in survival mode, and as with any species under high stress, the more we're consumed by risk and uncertainty, the less likely we are to focus on mating. Now, although I don't really think false accusations should be one of your main reasons for not having sex because of how unlikely it is, I do agree with...
Yeah, like that's... Unfortunately, a lot of guys have been brain poisoned into thinking that that's a real fear they should have. Like, the Johnny Depp stuff did a lot to poison a lot of dudes' brains. If you're just a normal dude who is not, like, prominent in any way, then you probably have nothing to worry about with that kind of thing. It's extremely rare. However, if you're a celebrity and you have some kind of platform, all I'll say is you better watch your ass. Because there is something to gain from lying about you. And that's all they have to do.
With the other points: economic instability, political chaos, social media keeping us from connecting in meaningful ways. Gen Z has their hands full with everything but each other. The sex recession I referred to in my last video is a symptom and a reflection of our current society. When people are uncertain about the future, they pull back from creating life and building relationships to focus on their own survival.
Just like the pandas. Just like the pandas in captivity that we were trying to get to mate.
Just think about the amount of times you've heard someone say, "Why would I want to bring a kid into this world?" I have personally seen that a million times online, and I think it's very telling for where we are as a society. So there we have it, 5 points from the mouths of Gen Zers for why they don't have sex. And outside of everything that I highlighted in this video, there were a ton of you that shared your personal struggles, from trauma to sexual orientation to personal beliefs. This is something people clearly feel very passionately about, so all insights are welcome. I'm truly blown away by how many people watched that video and how many of you subscribed.
It's a good video.
Obviously I greatly appreciate that. And if you haven't subscribed, I make videos like this that try to make sense of the world while keeping you informed. And I try to do that without too much doom and gloom. So if you're into that, definitely hit that subscribe button. And as always, thank you for watching. Shogun!
Link down below in the description, by the way, if you guys want to go send some support to the original video. Really good one, by the way. I like this channel a lot from what I just saw. I like this conversation. There's a lot to analyze in these responses, I think. I hope you guys end up having a lot to say in the comments, too. I'm curious to see the conversation on this one. So comment down below if you have anything interesting, any interesting takes to have down in the discussion. But of course, if you want to support this video, leave a like, subscribe if you want to see more from me, comment who up Xandering they haul if you don't know what to say. It does help boost the video in the algorithm. And make sure to join my Discord server if you haven't already. It's the main hub of my community and fanbase, so I hope to see you around. But hopefully I'll see you again in the next one. Thanks for watching.